Well, good morning, and happy almost Valentine's Day. I'm saying it because some of you guys didn't know it's almost Valentine's Day, and I'm just giving a little tip. You got till Tuesday to get it together, guys, so free little tip service announcement there, huh? Hey, we just kicked off a start of a series last week, Love and All That Stuff. We've been really kind of focusing on all the stuff part of things, and here's where, if you weren't here with us last week, or even if you were, here's kind of where we started. It was the simple fact that you're equipped to fall in love. And do you remember why we said you're equipped to fall in love? Because you have a pulse, right? That's exactly right. If you have a pulse, you are equipped to fall in love. And you all know that everybody in this room has fallen in love at some point. Some of you have fallen in love multiple times, and some of you have fallen in love with people you never even met. You had their posters around your bedroom. You know, you watched them on a TV interview, and you saw them look at you through there, and you knew they were looking at you through that TV set. You know, you dreamed about how your name would sound with theirs. And it's a fact. We are all equipped to fall in love. The problem comes not in our ability to fall in love. Our problem comes in this way, that we're not equipped to stay in love. Because staying in love requires something more than just the feeling and all that, good part that feels so much, because we can do that a lot. It's the staying in love, making this last a long time and in a good way that's hard for us. And last week we talked about one of the reasons was that we don't learn healthy relations naturally. In fact, a lot of us learned unhealthy relations pretty naturally. So we saw our parents, we saw others, and just trying to kind of figure this all out of how do you do that when we don't have anything. It doesn't come naturally for us to have healthy relationships. In fact, I saw an article that Eileen posted this week on our marriage page. And in that article, it talks about how some people did this huge study, and they were trying to figure out, how healthy relationships are created. And their conclusion of studying thousands of people was that about 3 out of 10 couples have healthy relationships. Now, if you're into statistics, you're saying, well, hey, I'm in the 70%. That's got to be pretty good. And you're not alone. But that's not the percent, right, Chad? That's not the side of the majority. You don't want to be in the majority. You want to be in the minority, right? But we would love here at New Hope to help you kind of move from that majority, if that's where you're at, into that minority, because we wanted that minority to expand to become the majority. But it doesn't come naturally. It takes work, and it takes hard work. And if you're just starting off in a relationship, congratulations. How many of you have been dating for less than a year? Raise your hands for me. All right, a couple of people. All right. How many of you have been married for 2 years or less? Big hands. 2 years or less, Chad, thank you. I had to remind him over there. A couple over here. Anybody over here? A couple over here. All right, all right. Everybody go, ah, because that's a great time to be together. Isn't everybody go, ah? Yeah, congratulations, But about the 1.5 to 2 year mark, things begin to change just a little bit, right? Because this person you just couldn't wait to spend the rest of your life with is now there all the time. And the stuff you thought was so cute before doesn't seem quite as cute so much anymore, And the feeling, that kind of, heartbeat and, I can't wait, has turned into, yeah, you can go do something else tonight. I'll do something. I'm okay with that. And we begin to think that we're losing that love, when in fact it's just this change, and we find ourselves in an important spot. And we asked this question last week, and it's a question we would all answer yes, even though in our own lives it may not be true, even though statistically we would say, that's probably not going to happen. But this idea that you could find somebody, that you could fall in love, and that you could stay in love for the rest of your life. And we would all say yes to that, even if it hasn't been our experience, because we all want to believe that's true. But we're faced with this huge truth that we don't learn healthy relationships naturally. And once you're in that place, you have really 3 choices. First choice is to end it. Some of you in this room have ended it. Some of you have ended it more than once, and some of you will be ended at some point. Or you can endure it. And some of you have been enduring it, and you will endure it. Or you can change it. And some of you have changed it. Some of you will change it. And sadly, some of you won't. But let me just ask you kind of a theoretical, thank you. Yeah, yes. Almost made a new word today. Wouldn't be the first time, but this one was a little harder. Okay, so theoretical question. If you find yourself facing those three choices, which choice do you think is the best choice? Which choice is the worst choice? We're actually going to talk about that next week, okay? So I'll give you a little time. But which choice is the hardest choice? And for a lot of us, it's the changing part. Because while we're willing to change, we're not so sure they're willing to change, and I'm not going to change until they change. And I've heard this hundreds of times of, I do my part, but they're not doing their part, and so why should I do my part if they're not doing their part? And it's easy to get sort of sucked into that and kind of find ourselves in that. I love how Andy Stanley puts it. He says, the same road leads to the same place every time. If you do what you've been doing, you're going to get what you've been getting. That's where the road leads. And the crazy thing is, what's true geographically, this road leads there, and you get in that road and go north, it's always going to lead there. What's true geographically is true financially. It's true physically. It's true professionally. And it's true relationally. And the only way to make a change is to get on a different road. Doesn't mean to end that road, but to figure out another way, another destination you're trying to get to. Because here's the thing, and I don't want you to miss this. The best chance for staying in love is to stay in love. Folks, that was it today. I mean, that's the big point today. So I'm going to try it one more time. Just give me a little reaction. Just make me feel good that I haven't wasted my whole week getting ready for this, right? So, folks, here it is. The best chance for staying in love is to stay in love. There we are. It's deep, too, if you think about it. And it's simple. But it's hardly simple because it's simply hard sometimes to stay. But it makes the most sense. You cannot stay in love if you don't stay in love. If you quit staying in love, you are not going to stay in love. Now, you may be saying, well, I've been trying to stay in love, but it's not working because they're not doing this, and she does this, and he won't do that, and all that kind of stuff. And that may be true, but your best shot, the best option for staying in love is for you to stay in love. And we talked last week that love was not a feeling. Love is a verb, a doing, right? And we're actually going to look at a list today that kind of describes, what love looks like. And it's something you've probably heard before at some point. Even if you're not from a religious background, you've probably heard it at a wedding someplace or read it on a card. It's one of those kind of squishy, gushy things that happens around this time of the year with Valentine's. You hear this, this love is this, and so. But as we read it today and as we think about it, I want us to think in a little bit deeper way about it, about how it applies to this ability to stay in love and to make those choices. But before we get there, I want to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, right? Lord, you know the prayers we've had, the hopes we've had, the things that we have clung to. And for those in this room and online who are part of the 30%, we want to thank you for what they're experiencing. We're not jealous of it. We're not envious of it. We're just happy because it reminds us that it is possible. But for those of us who find ourselves in the 70%, you know how much we've prayed about this, how much we have tried, how much we have hoped, how much we have longed for. And today I ask you to do what we just a couple of minutes ago sang about. Remembrance that you are the one that puts the breath in our lungs. But you are the one that can change everything in our life. And you are the one that this really ultimately is about. About how we receive and how we respond to the love that you've shown us. And so today I just ask you to again use some old words. These words that weren't penned to simply be put on a poster or be read at weddings. But words that you hoped when you inspired Paul to write them would help us to think about what love looks like. And so I ask you again today to speak to us in the way only you can. In your name, amen. If you want to follow along, we're going to be over in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which if you've been around a church a lot of your life, you know is called say it with feeling, the love chapter. You get a little bit of attitude with it, all right? It's not just the love chapter, it's the love chapter, right? And how many of you had this, if you were married, how many of you had this read at your wedding or was written someplace at your wedding? How many? We got a couple here, all right. It used to be really popular. I don't think it's quite as popular anymore. You know, it's not 140 characters, as Kofi was saying. It's a little bit longer than that, so we got a little shorter stuff. But back, in last century, sounds old now, last century, the 70s and 80s, this was big, love is this and love is that. But here's the thing for us. We know what feels like, right? We all kind of go, oh, yeah, I know what love feels. Love feels good, right? So everybody kind of give yourself a little hug if you're by yourself. If you're with somebody, put your arm around them. If you're just kind of starting to see them and you haven't put your arm around yet, this is your great opportunity. But put your arm and just kind of get the feel of love for a second and go, Don't say it too much. People start looking, but just a little, okay, yeah, all right. Let's keep it right there, all right? But we know what loves feel like, right? We know what it feels like, and we love that feeling. But what does it look like? Because that's really the difference between falling in love and being able to stay in love. And so as Paul writes these words again, 2,000 years ago, he didn't stop when he was writing this whole long letter to this church in Corinth thinking, one day they're going to put this on posters. And one day they're going to read it at weddings, and people are going to go, about the time when they say, I promise to love you for better and worse, and richer and poorer, and sickness and in health. And we mean in the moment all that stuff, but when it actually happens, we're not so great for the sickness part, or the poor part, or the worst part. We kind of want all the better stuff, and so that's why we read this stuff. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to kind of think about this as we read this, and you look at this and you say, wouldn't it be great to meet somebody like that? But the question I want us to ask ourselves is, wouldn't it be great if we were like the person that we would love to meet? Because that's really, I think, God's intent in inspiring Paul to write these words. That we begin to think about what love really looks like. And so here's the list, and you've probably seen it before. And it's the kind of list as we read it, you kind of go, oh, yeah. Here it starts off. Love is patient. And we go, okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense, that love. If somebody, if you really love somebody, you're going to give them some space. And the reality is when you're first dating somebody, you give them an awful lot of grace, don't you? But at some point, grace changes to something else. But it makes sense that love is patient, that love is kind of, hangs in there with somebody, and that love is kind. You would want love to be kind. When you wouldn't want love to be mean, that would be a terrible kind of form of love. You want love to be kind. And by the way, if you're dating right now and you're kind of keeping a list, I want you to kind of think about this as we go through. Is the person I'm sitting with today or the person I've been dating, does this kind of match up? Are they patient? Are they kind? Because if they're not, at least running about 90% or 85% of this list, I would encourage you to rethink about where you're at in this relationship, all right? Right before Valentine's Day. Great advice, isn't it? Sorry about that. Got dark in here real quick. Okay, here we go. Love is patient, right? We go, yeah, I understand. Kind, yeah, should be kind. Love is not jealous, yeah, because we've seen people that, where their love's jealous, they're freaked out about any time, who they're with talks to somebody of the other sex. They're, what are you doing? And that's not a pretty look. And it does not brag. And we know that we've been around people who've sort of bragged about their love and talks about how their love is the greatest, and the most deep, and the widest. Their love is just unlike any other love in the history of mankind. And we're just like, oh, really? And it's not proud. And it's not arrogant and conceited, and there's, something a little bit, kind of sexy about somebody who's kind of got a lot of confidence, but there's a line where it passes, and it's like, that's not really love to be all kind of into all that stuff. And love is not rude, and it's not disrespectful. And we know, we've been around couples that have been like that, right? You know those couples that every time they're having to talk, one of them's correcting the other one, and that one's correcting the other one, and it's just this back and forth, and just disrespectful. We know that's not a picture of love. It's not selfish, and that makes sense, Paul, that it's not self-serving, that love shouldn't just be about what am I getting out of this, because that gets, going the wrong way. It's really about what do I bring to this relationship. And does not get upset with others, which I'm appreciative of the way the expanded version expands this. And it tells us that it's not easily provoked or angered. Because the reality is, in relationships, you're going to get angry, right? Say yes. Because the person with you who's going to look, give you the bad look, you're saying yes because I asked you to say yes, all right? But the reality is, you get angry. So this idea that does not get upset with others is not the real idea. The idea is that it's not easily provoked or angered. At times you get angry, but it's not easily provoked. But if you've been in a relationship with somebody who's easily provoked, that's not a great picture of love. That every little thing is a big deal, that's not a great thing. Occasionally if there's something that gets to be a big deal, that's a different thing. And love does not count up or keep a record of wrongs that have been done. Some of you have been in those kind of relationships. Sadly, some of you are in those kind of relationships. Some of you had parents that were like that. Your mother was a great family historian. And anytime anything went wrong, she was glad to bring out all the records. Starting in 1972 and going forward. And when you've been around that, you just know there's something that just doesn't feel right about that and how somebody's responding. And Paul would say, that's right, because love doesn't count up and keep records of wrong, isn't just kind of waiting for that chance to keep just bringing it back up and bringing it back up. Love takes no pleasure, that does not rejoice in evil, that is wrongdoing or injustice, but rejoices over the truth. This idea that love is about celebrating the wins, but also love is about not sort of rejoicing when I win an argument, but you lose an argument. It's all about me kind of winning. It's this idea that I kind of take great joy in proving you wrong, to be able to tell you, I told you so, because let's face it, I did tell you so. That's not really the picture of love. Love doesn't rejoice when you finally, I got the win, And some of us get into those kind of relationships where it is about battles and about who's right and who's wrong and who's winning more. And in the process of winning those arguments and winning the battles, you end up losing this thing that's supposed to be so important to you. And as you read that list, you kind of go through and think, am I patient? In general, am I kind? I try to be, am I long-suffering? Am I not pride? You kind of ask yourself all those kind of things. But then Paul does a little bit of a turn here in this passage. And he actually bases on it's a repetitive thing. And he says, in the original language, he keeps saying it's this word always this, always this, always this, always. And he's kind of building up to something. He's putting all these things together to try to convey something. But when you first read this and first hear this, your initial response is kind of like, whoa, that's a little kind of extreme, because hold it here, Paul. I know some situations in life that doesn't sound like that would be the right thing. So here, look at this with me. He writes, love patiently accepts, that it bears all things, that it always protects. And so you would say, okay, this idea of long suffering, but that it patiently accepts and bears all things, Paul? Isn't some things a little bit too much, and something too much to have to bear? But he doesn't stop there. He keeps with this thought going. He says, it always trusts, that is, it believes all things. And is that really the healthiest thing? Should you believe everything, even especially when you know they're not telling you the truth? Should you still believe it? Is that really what love looks like? It always hopes, that it hopes all things. It tries to stay hopeful, and it kind of makes sense that you want to stay hopeful, but what about in the bad things? It always endures, that it endures all things. And I don't know about you, but I would ask the question of Paul. I'd say, hey, Paul, are you serious about that? That love ought to endure all things? Because that kind of concept has been used to keep people in abusive relationships for hundreds of years. They say, that's what the Bible says. The Bible says love endures all things, so you just have to endure it. Is that really what you're after, Paul? And it's easy to see those things as separate and miss the togetherness that Paul is talking about. He's talking about this concept of love. And he's talking about a choice that love makes, not the totality of the inclusiveness of always and that part, but the idea of what it ought to lean towards. Because here's the last part he says. He says, love never ends, that it never fails, that it never falls short. And we would say, a lot of us in this room, but I've been in situations where I was in love, and I thought they were in love, but they were no longer in love, and that love failed me. But Paul is reminding us of something even deeper than that. He's reminding each of us of this power of choice, power of leaning that we have. Because here's the challenge for all of us. Everyone, no matter what relationship, whether it's a romantic relationship, or whether it's a dating relationship or a married relationship, whether it's a work relationship, a neighbor relationship, any kind of relationship this falls in. There's this challenge between what I expect on one side and what I experience on the other, right? And you've all had this happen, right? You have expectations and then somebody doesn't come through with them, and what do? Because between what I expect and what I experience is this gap. And the question is, what do you put in the gap? What do you put in when he says he's going to be home by 6 and it's 6:40? What do you do when she said she was going to be ready to head out on your big trip because you got all this long distance to drive, and she was going to be ready at 7 o'clock in the morning, and now it's 8:30 and she is still in the shower? But it's a challenge for us. What do you put in the gap between what you expect? And all of us enter into relationships, let's be honest, we enter with some fair expectations, but we also enter into them with a little bit of some fairy tale expectations, right? We have our picture in our mind of what it would be like to be in love, and whether it's based on reality of what we saw in our parents or what we saw in other people, or more likely what we saw in movies and read in books. We have these expectations. Those expectations run up against the reality of what I experience. And every relationship faces this. And what we put in the gap begins with us and comes out of us. So think about it. What happens when he doesn't follow through, or she doesn't do what you expected? Do you right away say, I knew it, she was supposed to be here, but she's on the phone with her sister again. All they ever do is talk. And she tells all of our stuff. And why does she tell all? Do you kind of go that way, or do you say, well, something must have come up, something must have happened? But what goes in the gap it begins with us and comes out of us, because all of us have some stuff that has gotten into us. We said last week that you get into relationships to get. We all have ulterior motives in dating somebody, in marrying somebody, in working for somebody, in our relationships we have with our neighbors. And you may say, oh, no, Mike, I'm just nice to my neighbor because I'm supposed to be nice. I'm a friendly person. Well, maybe you're friendly to them because you want them to be friendly to you. Maybe you're friendly to them because you're tired of their dog doing his stuff in your yard, and you're just hoping that being nice to them will get that taken care of. But here's the question. What's your default? When your expectations are here and your experience is in a much different place, what's your default? Which way do you tend to go? Do you tend to go to, I'm going to cut them some slack? Or do you tend to go to, there we go again, it's the same old stuff. How many times have we had this discussion? It's always about the same stuff. And what do you put into that gap? Here's the thing I want to suggest to you. That you ought to fill the gap and find the most generous explanation. The most generous explanation, because here's the reality. When you were first dating that person, you found the most generous explanation, didn't you? You maybe even thought it was a little kind of cute that she was just running a little bit late, just wants to feel a little special, so we'll let her do it, And now when she runs late, do you want to still kind of feel like, hey, I just wanted to feel special, or do you kind of go a different way? What's the most generous explanation? He may not be indecisive. Maybe he's just thoughtful. He just needs to think about things a little bit longer. Maybe he isn't so impatient as much as he is intense. He's just kind of a real focused individual. But in order to stay in love, my suggestion to you is to battle. If you are a default and your default is always to the negative, that you battle that tendency to always go that way. And to choose what you put in and find the most generous explanation. Because isn't it true that there have been times when you got an explanation of why somebody was late, why somebody didn't get the project done, why they didn't do what you thought they were going to do, and you went, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. But you had already gone so far the other way that even though it made sense, you were not going to cut him any slack. Because I am already so far over here, even if I take a step back, it doesn't change anything, so I'm just going to stay here. So to find the most generous explanation, and this is even more important, then believe it. Because it doesn't do any good just to find it, but to believe it. Because here's the second part of the truth. I choose what goes in the gap. When you let me down, when you don't live up to my expectations, whether they're real or unreal, whether they're having a chance to be discussed or not discussed, I'm the one who chooses how to make sense out of that. I'm the one who says, oh, there she goes again. She always does this. Or I'm the one who says, must be a good reason why this didn't get done. I'll have to find out what it is. But let me ask you a question here before we go to the next slide. Which of those two options do you think would help you stay in love longer than the other? You can answer, by the way. I won't. The person next to me may give you an elbow, but I'll let you answer, all right? Which of those two do you think? Generous, ungenerous? And if that's true, why wouldn't that be the thing that we would work on, that we would strive towards, that we would aim for? Because wouldn't you, if you find yourself in that 70%, wouldn't you want that to leave that group of 70 and move into that group of 30? Wouldn't you love it if your relationship could move from end it or endure it to something that's changed for the better? Paul will actually wrap this whole love chapter up a little bit later in the very first verse of chapter 14. As he's talked about love, and he's talked about the kind of meaning of love, and how really love is the undergirding of everything that we do, because it's about how we act, it's about how we're moved to do that. And then he simply says this: you should seek after, that is, pursue, make your aim, love. Because Paul knows the power of love. And he knows that love is a verb, that it's something we do, but it's also something that we feel. And he says if you aim at the doing, the feeling becomes the thing that undergirds it all. So let me ask you this question as we wrap it up this morning. What would happen if you filled the gap in your life and your relationships with the most generous explanation? What would your life look like just for this next month? I'm not going to just say for a week, because I think you're going to need a little bit longer than that. If you're like me, you tend to go one way. That's not the healthy way. You got to kind of work at this. It becomes a process to work. But what would life begin to look like if you kind of just said, hey, I didn't get the response I thought, but I'm going to put in there this idea of there must be a good explanation. There must be a generous thing. Something else must have come up. Well, how would that impact your life? And do you think that impact would help you? Or just be another thing? And I know some of you are thinking, man, Mike, I wish let me up on stage right now because I got to tell the story. Because you don't have any idea what I have to live with. You don't know how big that gap is or how deep that gap is or how much that gap has been worn down because of how they haven't done their part. This is not the time or place for that, all right? Because here's the second part of what if. What would happen if you chose who you, not he or she, will be? Because the reality is, that's the only person you can choose for. But if you will make that choice, you may still not stay in love. But if you don't make that choice, you won't stay in love. And my appeal to all of us is at least to do what we can do on our part to stay in love, to change the course. And like I said, next week we're going to talk about what happens if you get to that ended place. And we're looking at a passage of Scripture that I don't think I've ever heard anybody preach on. And there's a reason, Kofi. It could get bad next week, man. It could get ugly, ugly. But we would love to see your relationships changed. For those of you that aren't in a relationship right now, we would love for you to kind of start off on the best foot and keep that going. We'd love for that idea of falling in love at the start to continue on the rest of your life. But we know that's only going to happen as you recognize you got to work hard at this thing. And that runs counterintuitive to what we kind of pick up from our culture. You know, our culture says, oh, no, if you're in love, it just goes perfect. It's like syrup on pancakes, you know. It just flows and there is no work at it. It just happens automatically. That's because it takes less than 2 hours to watch that movie. That's why it happens automatically. You don't see them picking up the clothes, the dirty clothes that are laying around for the next 20 years, you know. You don't see them fixing the car because this one of them keeps backing it into stuff. You don't see any of that kind of stuff. And that's why it's important to recognize that again, we don't get great examples of healthy relationships. But every healthy relationship I have seen, that I've been a part of, that I have experienced, has required work and has required filling the gap with the most generous explanation and believing it. And because here's the crazy thing. Couples will do it at the start, but as their life goes on, that gap seems to get bigger and bigger, and they do it less and less. But friends in their life, lifelong friends, they will still fill that gap with the most generous because they're their friend. Which seems weird that we would do it for a friend and not for this person who we share so much of life with.